All right, guys, how you doing? I'm Captain Brian Bacon. This is Captain Shamus Merritt. We're from Big Game Sport Fishing. We run a charter boat service out of Snug Harbor, Point Judith, Rhode Island. Last year we did 279 trips. 79 of those were offshore trips, which include going to the canyon, sharking, mahi, bluefin fishing. So we spend a ton of days offshore between myself, Shamus, and my brother. So we pretty much have a good pulse of what's going on offshore, really starting the end of May, and then we'll go until, you know, the fish are gone or the weather turns to shit on us. So we're going to cover a lot of topics today. So as we kind of jump around, if you guys have any questions, let's keep it informal. Please feel free to ask because, you know, when we get to the end of the seminar, you might forget. So, you know, don't be bashful. Just raise your hand, shout it out, and we'll, you know, do the best we can to answer it for you.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, sir.
That's why we did this small like this. So you're not in a classroom with 200 people at Cast-Far. Cast-Far is great, right? But you get to talk, you get to ask, you get to learn. You might get ridiculed, but it'll only be in front of 20 people, so don't worry about it. But yeah, ask ahead in anything you got.
Okay.
I won't interrupt you. Sorry.
You know,
I'm sure you will.
Yeah, no, guys, just shout it out if you got any questions. So we're going to cover a whole bunch of stuff today. This is just some of the stuff that we use. You know, we use all Daiwa reels, obviously Crafty One custom rods, Rapala, Ray Marine Electronics, LT Marine, harpoons and gaffs, Bronzy lures, Williamson jigs. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, so this is just kind of scratching the surface, but as we go through, get more into that. So right now we're running 3 boats. We have a 33 center console, 36 Carmen, 36 Dawson. The Hydrosport and the Dawson are primarily what we take offshore, especially for the farther runs, because the Carmen's just a slower ride. You know, we're cruising 25, 27 knots, so we can get out pretty much anywhere pretty quick. So what are we going to talk about today? Off-season tackle preparation. So for us guys, you know, we're going 7 days a week, pretty much starting, you know, middle of May. So now is when we're getting everything ready for the season, as far as, you know, servicing all our reels, getting all our jigs, going through everything, make sure it's ready to go. Because when you go on 7 days a week, you don't have much time in between trips to get the stuff ready. So preparation is key. Offshore networking. You know, we talk with a lot of guys that are offshore. I mean, we're offshore every day, but there may be some guys that are fishing out of the Cape, or maybe south of Montauk. So we've got a good pulse of what's going on out there. Tackling gear that we use. And also we're going to break it down by fish by month. So as I mentioned before, we really start in May. And what we start doing in May and June, and then we transition into July, August, September, October, and so on. So it kind of gives you a sense of how we do it and what we target during different points of the year.
All right, so like Brian said, what do? Like right now, we are busy. So some guys look at fishing based on, you know, the summer's here, boats are in the water, it's time to start playing the game. That's the total opposite you want to do if you want to be successful in this game. This game, we spend all of our money right now. So literally, from all of our leader materials to all of our crimps to everything, it's all laid out and we have it all before we even start the season. Why? 2 reasons. One, all of a sudden somebody has a game plan and they come back to the dock and all of a sudden they slaughtered something in another direction and the tackle shops are closed. So when you start doing it all the time, you realize you'll run into that situation. So what we do, we are unbelievably organized. Everything has a label, everything's marked, and the whole reason for that is because when you get offshore and you're in the middle of the game, the heat of the battle, I can literally yell to a customer, hey, and some of these guys have been on our boats with us, I'll yell at them and say, hey, grab me this box, it's going to say X, Y, and Z on it, and they pull it out. So even though you might not be on the boat every day, I can still utilize you because we take a lot of pride in the organization of our stuff. Every single piece of equipment that we have, we service. We'll get into that pretty heavy in a little bit, but I mean, even rods that I'll have Ralph build this year, we'll take them apart, we'll strip them down, we'll clean them, we bring them back, he services them, and we do the same thing with all of our reels. Why? Our stuff's even brand new, and I still do it. Why? Because a guy who takes that reel apart every single year, I'd rather have him take it apart and find an issue with it in February than in July, and then be down the gear that you've spent all this money on to get out there. So again, this is literally our stuff on the bench right now. It's all getting stripped off and it's all getting brand new. Why? Because in the middle of this, you might be catching a big eye that's got 150 feet of line on it and ends up hitting something, and I don't know that it happened. So then I end up losing gear, end up losing other fish. So we're constantly changing, stripping our gear off. Even when we didn't go every day, I still did the same stuff. We'd sit in that shop all winter long. All of our trolling gear, which people think we're crazy, all of it gets cut apart and we start from scratch. So it's important. So the off-season preparation, going to a place like Ralph, walking in here, literally, Ralph knows we've been doing it for years. We walk in and go, here's what we need. And then we, it takes them a while to get it all for us, but we put it all together. And then literally, that whole wall you see in the shop, right there, is all of our gear for the season. So as we're using it, I keep restocking on it. Gear changes every single year. That wall's gotten bigger and bigger over the course of time of the stuff that I have to have, especially when we get into some of the jigs and stuff, but it's important to do the prep.
One of the things with this, guys, why this is important, we would take the stuff off the boat, put it in bins, and then we'd say, all right, let's take inventory on what we have. All this shit would sit in the bin. Then we would go and rebuy the stuff that we already had. So I don't know how many times we did that. So we said, screw this, we have a lifetime supply of hooks and jigs and everything else. So now we got all our shit organized, and we know exactly what we need. We know exactly what we need to stock on each boat. And it keeps you more organized. You know what spreader bars you need to rebuild, which ones you need to toss. It's a much better system. I mean, we're guilty of it. I mean, we did that for I don't know how many years. And we're like, we got to get more organized. We're just throwing money away here. So getting into the reels, guys. I mean, as Shamus mentioned, this time of year we go through absolutely everything. Most of our reels right now, we use all Daiwa gear. I mean, if we have 2 seasons on them, it's going away. Everything else, if it's a year old, we're pretty much going to rebuild. If stuff got melted or destroyed, it's going away. We're going to sell it and get new gear. With the offshore stuff, we don't want to run the risk of the guy who's on his bucket list trip and a reel blows up on him. Doesn't look too good on us if we're giving them crappy gear. One of the things we really pride ourselves on as captains is we don't fish any 1985 Walmart gear. All your stuff is brand new. It's going to be serviced, and you're going to have new line. You're going to have new jigs. You're not going to be pulling something out that looks like it was like some Fisher Price thing from like the 80s. All of our stuff is new.
So another thing too, what like a lot of people don't realize with like cleaning and waxing your rods, Ralph, like keeping them clean and keeping them waxed is a huge part of the preparation. Because all of a sudden, I had guides that, we're tough on our gear. It's outside every day. I mean, Ralph will tell you, like, we bring some stuff back here, and he's like, when did I build this? And we're like, it happens quick. But one thing we do now is, like, I take a lot more pride in making sure my guides are clean. I put a little, like, I literally, you can wax them, clean them up, clean and do the same thing to all the rods. Because, we're out in the elements every day. And you guys spend a ton of money on equipment, and all of a sudden you're just letting it beat in the salt, and even though you hose it off, it really doesn't do a ton as much as it does when, I'll take the time and effort to really buff and clean all that stuff up in the off season. But what happens is that, you'll even notice on, if you run 5-10 trips a season, and you get offshore, you come back, and all of a sudden you start stripping your gear apart, you start taking the reels off. The reel seats have salt that's built up underneath. I mean, we've been able with some of our offshore trolling gear. We've had some of it now for a long time, and we put it through hell. Why? Because we just take that extra step every single time to take it apart. Every couple of weeks, if we get blown out, we'll service all of it. But one thing we do with that is it's because we're inspecting the gear, and people are like, well, why do you do it? And it's like to the point of you're 100 miles offshore, we've had a slow day, and then all of a sudden guys end up having the line break on them. It's because you have an issue with a roller guide, or you had an issue with that, and that's how we find everything. So by staying in constant contact with all the gear, it really prevents that situation where you lose something in the heat of the battle that you wouldn't if you took the time to clean it and find all the stuff up front. So again, to the trolling lures, guys, I'm dead serious. All of my gear right now, we took a weekend, we just cut it all apart. Every single thing, and I'll tell you why. Last weekend we were in Boxborough, Massachusetts, and they had a tank, right? Big tank that had all the live bass and stuff in it. And we were watching them cast lures in it. But what happens with all that line and stuff when they're when they're constantly casting it in and out of the water, and just from being around the show, when you're watching them with a tank that's underwater, you can actually see the monofilament, the color, the discoloration in it. So by taking the time and effort, a lot of guys go, I got all this nice trolling gear, and they take it out. You don't really use it that much, but what ends up happening is when you start putting it in the water, guys, it looks like hell. It looks like hell. So by taking that time and effort to chop it all apart and re-rig it, even gear that we have that's hot, meaning we've been out, we started catching on it, we've had real good action for the last couple of days on this specific lure or something like that, we'll chop it apart, rebuild it. So it's really easy. Do yourself a favor with Ralph. Purchase a big set of crimpers, handheld crimpers, not the little ones where you're like this and your crimps look like bananas. Because guess what? When you put that banana in the water, that lure's moving all over the place. It doesn't look natural at all. So buying the right crimpers and having the right tools, literally you'd be taking a ride offshore that next morning and cut it apart and put it back together. So trolling lures, I'm a stickler. Chop it apart and start from scratch. Same thing when it comes down to re-skirting stuff. Our spreader bars only make it for us one season. Why? They start looking like hell.
A trick to that though, guys, without rebuilding or, without throwing everything away, if that thing's been sitting in the spreader bar bag for a long time, take those off, cut them up, cut them off, soak them in laundry detergent. You're going to get all the dirt and the salt off there, and they're going to be nice and soft again. You can reuse them that way. So if you have something that's still usable, that isn't all faded, that isn't like beat to hell, that's a good way around it. We do that a lot with a lot of our trolling plugs and skirts as well.
And the same thing is that we use a lot of Joe Shoots on the boat, a lot. Rigging a lot of ballyhoo, and a lot of that gear we'll cut apart and we'll really take the time and effort to clean it. Literally, like with My Little Pony brush, you could sit there and get everything to straighten back out and look right. And because if you're looking at it when you take it out of the bag, and it's a big balled up mess on the bottom. It blows my mind. I've been on boats with guys when we go on other people's boats for tournaments or something like that. And you're like, what are you doing? Stop. You're taking that rod totally out of the mix. You might get something if you're in them thick, but your odds of it being productive is not going to happen. But we'll be right next to somebody else, and they'll be like, what are you catching them on? The red-headed slut. We got him. We're banged. He's every single time that things come on the red-headed slut. Why? Because he's taking his old red-headed slut out. He's dragging it behind the back of the boat, and the thing looks like he's dragging a snowball around. It looks fine when you put it in the water, but it doesn't look nearly as clean as ours does. Because as soon as we put ours in the water, that skirted lure looks absolutely perfect along that ballyhoo, and the thing's laying perfectly straight and flat, and it looks totally natural. Again, that leader is perfectly clean because you just kept it rigged. So that stuff makes a big difference. People will be right next to us and be like, what are you doing? I'm doing the same thing as you.
Is it always mono or is it flow?
No, so most of our Joe Shoots and stuff like that, we've got fluoro on. But I'll tell you right now, the clean Genkai rigged, I'm just as much of a fan. I've kind of been sold into.
What about the spreaders? Is it always a transition, or is it always back to mono?
The spreader bars and
mono
stuff like that? That's all
mono.
mono.
It's all back to mono.
It's all back to mono, and that hence again the other reason why I'd rather keep putting fresh mono into them, cutting them apart and redoing it just to make sure. Because the other thing is that when you leave them in a bag for a long time and you take it out, it's like a coil spring, right? And you let it lay there. When you take it fresh off that reel and you rigged it, it's laying perfectly straight. Back in the day, we used to hang them all in the shop to get them all to hang straight, and then at the end of the day, it was like we needed to take it one step further, cut it apart, and just take the time to rebuild it.
Even with the Joe Shoots, if you soak those in the detergent, it'll loosen up all that hair on there. You can literally just go like that with your finger. It'll just break it all up and it'll lie nice. Hose it off, just as good as new.
Give them to your daughter with a hairbrush.
Yeah,
There you go.
Let
Have
her
her
take
do
some
it.
time.
Have
My
her do
Little
the work.
Pony and let her comb them all
Yeah.
out. But again, we in the last few years, guys, and we'll get into this pretty hot and heavy. There's a big part of our game is jigging, popping for tuna fish, and we take constant inventory on the boat of all of this stuff, which we'll get into later on. But making sure we have different colors, making sure we have all of them all laid out, all nice. When the chafe gear starts getting beat up, we don't even replace it. We just replace the lure now, because by that time, the jigs themselves get beat up, and we just found by staying that much further ahead with that nice clean gear, it makes a huge difference. Bronzies is another thing. You know, we take constant inventory because we'll be out there. Jack and Lou will be next to us one day. It happened to us, and they were pounding them on one thing, and we didn't have it. And I was like, I couldn't take it anymore. I was coming out of my skin. I'm like, this is absolutely.
You went home.
Yeah, I did. I actually did. I just changed the whole game. I changed the whole day. I left where we were just to start doing something else, because literally, fold back on me. It was just we still caught fish, but if I had something like that, it would have made a world of difference. Why now? Take that constant inventory, spend the extra money, and have it. It doesn't go bad.
So, you know, one of the important things, guys, whether you're trolling, whether you're chunking, whether you're jigging, you know, again, pre-trip prep or prepping on the way out. When you're running out, you know, if you're rigging leaders for jigging, whether you're using 60, 80 pound fluoro, rig them out there. When you guys get to the spot and you're ready to fish, wipe all your leaders down with like a rag or paper towel with rubbing alcohol.
Guys, that's huge.
If you've never done this, just do it one time after you run, whether you're running diesels or outboards. Makes a big difference, because what will happen is when you stick that fluorocarbon in the water, it reflects the sunlight, and now your fluorocarbon is visible to the fish. Okay, so make sure you wipe those down. Just carry a bottle of rubbing alcohol with you, whether you use paper towels or a rag. Wipe them down. We do that every trip. You know, knots and crimps is very important. You know, if you guys go out and like bail the tuna fish one day, and then you're going out the next day or the next weekend, make sure you retie those knots. Okay. Every time you catch a fish on there, that line is going to stretch. Whether you're using mono, you're using fluoro, whether you're using braid, just retie the knots. You know, it can make the day or make the difference between landing and not catching the fish.
Are you stretching your leaders first?
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot, like all of our chunking stuff, especially anything that we're putting a dead bait on, as soon as I put it in the water, because what happens is that it so a live bait will pull it out for you. To be honest with you, I don't go as nuts anymore as I used to with some of those. I'm still a big boy, and I'll still lean into it once or twice. But for my chunking stuff at night and all that other, I mean, I'm wrenching on it, trying to just get it as clean. And then while I'm pulling back on it, I'll have the other guy, even though I just tied it, he'll walk up behind me with a paper towel with alcohol on it, and he'll just drag it right down that line. Literally from just tying it and just cutting it off the spool, and it coming from the factory, that thing, the wipes work awesome. You know, so you end up just grabbing it, dragging it right down that line, and you'll see it every single time it's dirty. And we've really had a lot more luck on stuff by just being that much further in detail, especially with the chunking stuff, stretching it, cleaning it, and then it's
the other advantage of stretching is you're testing all of your
all your knots, your connections.
So if you're gonna have a failure, like when we're out bluefin tuna fishing,
Yep.
you're gonna run dirty, you crank the drag, and you just lay on it. That rod's been all the way over, you're cleaning the line. If it's gonna go, it's gonna go then.
Right.
yeah.
Because you're not gonna put any more stress on the fish.
Right.
So another thing with the pre-trip preparation stuff, guys, we'll take all those rods. People will see us coming and going from the dock. Some guys been on the boat. You look at it; it looks crazy. There's like 18 or 20 rods out. Between our trolling gear, our now having to have all the jigging stuff, also having some of the popping stuff ready, and all of that is literally comes apart and gets redone. When does it get redone? We're usually pretty beat by the ride out in the morning the next day. So a lot of times we like to take care of it when we're taking the gear apart from the day before, from that last trip. We just re-rig it right then and there, which you would end up doing on a regular day before you leave. But just take it all apart, even though it's been sitting inside the boat or something like that. Literally, it gets dew on it, it gets everything. So just cut it apart, start from scratch.
One of the other thing, guys, is pre-rig jigs and lures on all the rods. I was guilty of this. Okay, so listen to this. You put the point in the GPS, right? And just because you put that point in the GPS doesn't mean that's where you're going to start fishing. 20 miles shy of your spot, there's fish busting all over the place, and you're not ready. What happens? You may have 5 minutes, you may have 1 minute to make or break your trip. Everybody knows offshore fishing. You may have a shot at one fish, or you may slay them that day. So be prepared. I have made this mistake, you know, being lazy. It's like, we'll get to it when we get out there. Then it's like, oh shit, I'm not ready. You know, so be prepared. We don't make that mistake anymore. All your Joe shoots, rig them with ballyhoo, thaw out your ballyhoo either the night before, put them on ice, get all that stuff ready to go. get your leaders, everything tied up. You know, whether you're going to plan on trolling, get your jigging stuff ready, get everything ready and out. So if you do stumble upon those fish, you're ready to roll. Okay. Set up rods for pitch baits. A lot of times, you know, you'll see sharks cruising on the surface. You know, there's plenty of times we'll be tuna fishing, you'll just see a mako cruising on the surface. Have that stuff ready to go. Have those shark baits. When we go offshore, we're prepared for everything. We'll bring a flat of butterfish. We'll bring some bluefish. When you're out there, you can even troll up bluefish. I mean, sharks will eat anything. We've caught dogfish, live line dogfish. Makos will take those. Really have that stuff ready to go. Have something rigged with the shark leader on it. So if you do see something on the surface, you're ready to go. We always roll with the chum bucket, even if we're planning on going tuna fishing. Just because if the tuna bite sucks, the great thing about fishing in southern New England waters is there's always something to catch. You can always fall back on sharking. If you're offshore, you can go chase mahi. You can go get marlin. And we're going to get in depth about that in a little bit, but we're ready for everything because you never know what's going to happen. Worst case, you don't use that chum bucket, or if the butterfish are still frozen, you can use them the next trip. Okay.
Another thing with this too is that, you know, more than likely, you guys who are here are the people who are the go-to guys for putting your boat together. It's just, you are the people that you see, and that's how it is. And a lot of crew you ask to go aren't nearly as engaged or involved. So a big thing with the pre-trip stuff for you guys, because we fish on other people's boats also, is if that guy's going to come with you tomorrow morning and he says he's got a wedding today and you're the poor bastard who's got to get that boat ready, find another guy. I'm serious. Find another guy. Find another buddy who really is going to want to be there. Why? Because the guy gets on the boat, takes goes for a 100-mile ride with you. He's got his feet up on the beanbag. He's asleep. You get there, you start trolling, and all of a sudden, the guy's playing with your drags, or he's doing whatever. You're like, dude, what are you doing? Don't touch it. Leave it alone. It's perfect. We now even tell the customers when they're on the boat, you know, you have to get into these rods are set. You don't need to touch this. You don't need to touch that. Even when you're on your own boat, the guy who comes down and helps you put all the gear together, you'll at least he'll have that idea before you get there, you know, and you'll have that preparation together, opposed to it when all of a sudden you're like, big eyes are falling out of the sky, and every single rod's going off, and all of a sudden this guy drops it to free spool on you. I'm telling you, it happens. Because
our charter customers do that a lot.
And it happens.
It's awesome.
Yeah, you know. So all of a sudden you're knuckling onto a foot on the gunnel and pulling the line back with having your fingers in it because you still want to get it, and that's all solely based on the fact that he should have been with you the day before. Because while he's there, and if they're new to the boat, explain it. People who fish with us will know. I will pound in your brain while you're on a boat with me how all of this stuff works. Because we have seen,
The whole fucking ride.
yeah, the whole ride. I won't shut up telling you what to do.
No matter how many times you've been out.
Yeah, I don't care if you fished every day and you tell me you have every day. He's fished plenty and he knows he's on the boat, and I'm still telling him what to do. Why? Because it's my way. You know, and big thing is that we've lost so many beautiful fish that what I've realized is that you need to have those conversations. That's a huge part of it, is that day before, you're going to figure out, while you're out there, who's driving the boat, who's going to be the leader person, who's going to be this, who's going to be that. You're going to talk through the end game stuff, you know, which we're going to get into a little bit more. But all of this stuff happens multiple times on the same trip. So you do it the day before all this stuff's getting ready. You talk about it while you're out there. You know, we'll constantly be like, I'm gonna be the leader guy. Gloves are right here. Him and I fish together every day. We still say it to each other. Hey, I got the gloves out. They're right here. Hey, I've got this. Hey, I've got that. Why? Because we've had everything go off. Everything. Like every single rod gets hooked up. And it's not the time to figure any of that out. You know, you screaming at me, where'd you put the gloves? Where'd you do this? Where'd you do that? So having a game plan the day before is definitely the first step.
Guys, when you go offshore, you should always be prepared to bring something for catching bait. We always roll offshore with mackerel rigs, sabiki rigs, squid jigs. That could be the make or break of having a successful trip. There's been plenty of days where we've gone offshore where troll bite's not happening, jig bite's not happening. All right, we gotta go find some live bait. You know, if you can either catch some mackerel, get some live squid, that makes the difference right there. And look at your sounder. Use your sounder as the tool. We got a couple slides coming up here. where we just show massive clouds of bait. That's a big deal. And whether you can keep them alive, if you have a live well on your boat, that's great. If not, they'll work just as good dead. We've got just as many big tuna fish on dead squid, dead mackerel as we have on live baits.
So just like we have this stuff laid out like this for trolling and in that preparation, the other thing that we also have is we have the same stuff for bait. I mean, literally we have, this is for squid, this is for mackerel, this is for this is for that, because I'm telling you right now, him and his brother and I last year get out there, and all of a sudden we're 100 miles offshore, we get something out, and all of a sudden I got one squid that goes by. I see one squid, right? I'm not marking anything on the sounder. What did we do? Started bailing squid up just because I saw that one swim by. We had all this stuff rigged right then and there. We grabbed it. We had the first tuna fish in the boat in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That was it. Beautiful yellowfin. So just by having that gear set, I didn't waste the time in, tying the rig and then putting the squid jig on because the hole's, the size of the tip of a pen. It's a pain in the ass. So just take that time and that effort, lay out all your different stuff. Again, that's what we do in the off season. Go to a guy like Crafty, you should see the amount of squid jigs we have. It's freaking obnoxious. There's literally like totes of them. When we just cut it apart, re-rig it, have all that stuff good to go. Same thing with the mackerel stuff. But make sure you've got it all set up just like you do your offshore stuff.
And lastly on this, guys, just offshore networking. Just talk to people. Talk to people at your marina. Shamus and I, if you guys want, call us. We'll tell you where the bite's at. I mean, we don't care. We're out there every day. I have really nothing to hide. I'm not going to post it on Facebook, but if you guys are like, hey, I was at Ralph's seminar, just call us. We'll let you know where it's at.
We have people do it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we have
and
so
it's
many customers that have our own boats.
So here's the deal, and we're going to get into the reciprocating. If I call you and I tell you something, and it works for you, and I find out that you didn't, we're in the Fockers. This is the circle here. You're dead to me. We'll never talk again. So having that crew that you work with, that you actually can trust their intel, is equally as important. I mean, we have a group, a small group, and that we talk to every single day, multiple texts, multiple whatever, and that group of people, if he tells me something, it's rock solid, because some guy says, "Oh, my buddy killed it." Well, that was a week and a half ago. You know what I mean? So you don't have that real information. So the people that you work with, don't be the only guy on the dock because you're just getting into it, not trying to talk it up with some guy like myself who does it every day. Like Brian said, walk down the dock, more than likely I got nothing to hide. I'm actually going to tell you where we were and what we were doing. The only difference is that when you see me offshore, I'm going to leave you because I'm not a huge fan of
Well, and I was going to say this because I don't know that you will, even though
See,
you guys...
I knew you couldn't keep quiet.
No, hold on though, because you might not say this being politically correct, and I'm not good at that. If you do get information and then you go and you spread it to the world, screw you, right? If you're going to be in the inner circle and we're going to help you and we're going to do this and we're going to be part of this bigger family, have respect for that. These guys work on the water and we don't want 1,000 boats out there when the giant bite happens and 2 days later, everyone's there. So that's one thing. And two, you still have to earn it.
Yeah, no,
You still got to go do it. Don't expect to call someone to be able to go there and do it. You still got to earn it. You still got to learn. So you might not say that, I would.
yeah.
So
And getting back to that's a good point. I mean, a lot of guys will go out there and you see them trolling and trolling and trolling. If like how we fish now is we'll troll to find the fish, and once we find them, we're either
done.
jigging, we're chunking, or live baiting. That's it.
The game
I mean,
is not what it was in 1990.
Yeah, I mean, technology's come a long way. We're going to talk about some of the different ways that we fish, but like Ralph said, you got to earn it, but you also got to be prepared. You got to have the stuff to do it properly. Because there's been plenty of trips where we'll go to spots. We're going to talk about a ton of the spots that we fish, and guys are trolling around all day, and they're not catching shit because all the fish are on the jig, or they're not having live bait. So that's what sets you apart from having a successful day and not. So here's a picture of our boat. This is the Dawson. This is us on the troll.
So there's a rod in every rod holder.
So we got we're trolling everything here. We got all of our jigging stuff up here. We got our popping stuff, and we're ready to go. And even up in the helm, you can't really see it. Up in this area here, we have rods hung up with chunking gear and chunking leaders ready to go. So no matter what we have, we are ready for it. Okay.
And why? Hold on with that one, right? So, we were in the canyon last season and the season before, and the troll bite is predominantly, again, like you said, how we start when we're in the canyon, right? And sometimes in the canyon we might not even transition to a jig, but most of the time, a lot of the time we're trolling. So what ended up happening was that we were trolling, and all of a sudden we're hooked up behind the back of the boat with 4 rods. I remember this day like it was yesterday. And all of a sudden I'm marking fish on the screen. So what do? Actually, I was running the boat. His brother grabbed the spinning rods with all the jigging stuff that was already on, pulled it on, dropped it down. We dropped 3 rods all at once. Now we had 7 eyeballs on all at once. So now we're doing the dance at the boat with the guys hooked up on those jigging rods with the Rons and some of the, actually those were some of the Shimano flatfall jigs, but we also ended up landing the fish on the troll, and now we have the fish staying with us. So we land the fish that are on the troll, but what happens? Now we've kept, because of the jig, and we're going to get into this a lot more, is what we found with the jig is that once you grab one on the jig, all of a sudden they're down deeper, they're more angry, they're more aggressive. So now all of a sudden you'll have a guy, boom, I'm tight, he drops it. Boom, I'm tight, I drop it. Boom, the guy comes tight on another one. And all of a sudden, now, sun's down, we're marking on the screen, we've got a pile of big eye and yellowfin underneath the boat, literally to the point where guys are like, we're done. We can't even do it anymore.
So when you guys get tight on the troll, literally what we'll do is we'll just toss the jigs or the Rons over, let them sink, come tight on the rod, let it dive down maybe 50 feet, come tight, the thing's going to scope up and like bang, you're going to get smacked. Another thing we'll do too on the troll, which works great when you're trolling the Joe Shoots, if you're marking fish down deep, stop the boat or put it almost in like where you're going 1 knot. Those baits are going to drop way down. They're going to scope way down because they're weighted 6 to 8 ounces. Come back up on the troll. They're going to come like this. You're going to get all those fish to come up, and you're going to get hit on your Joe Shoots.
Another thing, guys, with a lot of the Williamson jigs and the Daiwa jigs, there's a reason why they have different weights, because you're going to use them for different things. So a larger weighted rig that you have set up, when we're doing that and we're stopping and letting those Joe Shoots sink, you're going to grab a heavier jig, and you're going to drop that as fast as you can. And as soon as he's going to put the boat back in gear, as soon as he comes in gear, now you're bringing it back and you're banging it up. And I can't tell you how many times you now end up in that multiple hookup situation where as soon as you come tight, you'll end up having, the Joe Shoots will be going off, and now you're having them on the jig. So now instead of having a situation that day where you might have only grabbed a couple fish, now you've maximized that period of time, and you've got fish on the jig and you got fish behind you. Now some trips you just doubled the amount of fish that you're going to get for the day. So it does make a big difference.
So here's some of the gear that we use now. We transitioned, a few years ago from, the big 50s and 75s into the smaller gear. So we're using the Daiwa Dogfights, the conventional reels. Do we have any? I don't think we have any of those up here. But they're a smaller reel. They're about the size of a 25. And really, with these guys, with these reels, guys, they have 65 pounds of drag. You can fit just as much line on there with braid as you can with a 50 or 75. And one of the things that we found, we're a charter boat, so a lot of the people that come fish with us, it's their first time offshore fishing. And when we were fishing the bigger gear, they're strapped in, it's heavy for them. They had a tough time getting the mechanics down of pull up, reel down. So with this stuff, it's a lot easier for them to really maneuver the gear where they can actually fight the fish instead of fighting the gear. And it's a much more pleasurable experience for them. And you can land the fish just as quick on this light gear, guys.
And that's the thing. So let's just do this. How many of you guys have your own gear? All right. Out of what size gear do most of you guys have when we do this? 30s? 30s and 50s. All right. Pretty much that's standard for everybody, right? If you get on my boat, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, it looks like I got a bass reel out. And the thing is that when you get those 50s on a stand-up, I'm a big boy. I really don't necessarily have a problem with it. But I do when we start getting into a situation, even myself, when fish are closer to the boat. When fish are humped up right next to the boat, now you're having to be real mobile. That gear is clunky. And as soon as you're pulling it out and handing it off to Brian over here, you know what I mean, and moving it around the boat, we've lost fish. So another thing with going to this smaller gear and transitioning into the new blanks that are out, it's so much more comfortable. A lot of that 50s style gear you have is stout. It's stout. It's making your back work and everything else. The difference now with the new gear And blanks like these,
Oh, good. Here we go.
walk over here because you can't see on the camera.
It's good. It's brand new, so it might creak.
It's going to creak just because. But the difference is, so how many people think with this you can catch a 300-pound fish standing no problem? Easily, right? How many people? So we've had sharks and stuff on this gear, up to 500 pounds, no problem. Beat it, got it right next to the boat, just like that. But before you were using a 50, and you thought in your head, I've got to have this big gear just to get it here. It does not work like that anymore. So you cannot beat the power of that. And the other thing is that the retrieve rate on this is per crank.
36
like
inches.
It's like almost 30. So the thing is that you're gaining so much more than you are in that big heavy gear with that little half pump. You're just not getting it. Where with these,
That same setup right there, guys. That's all we use for sharking. Like that's all we use is the spinning gear. We're using the dog fights, with the AMF Crafty 1 rods.
pass
we've
it around.
gotten-
Get your hands on it. So another thing with this, just I'll stop and get into this a little bit, is some people are like, they don't realize why they're built like this. And people like us and Jack and Lou and Ralph and other people have spent a lot of time on big fish. The reason why this is tapered like this is because for me, what I've realized over time is when you're locked into a fish with a giant butt in your hand, you don't get any blood flow in your arms. So what ends up happening is the guy's in the fish like this, and he's locked up, and all of a sudden he's going, oh my God, I can't take it anymore. But with having the different shape, you could, by just moving your hands around, having a little more mobility, you get to bend your fingers a little more here. Now this one, you can move it around, and it makes a huge difference. So, the way the gear is now, it's a lot different than before. In that 50, holding that giant stand-up rod, bent back like this, your lower back's killing you, and your hands are dying, and you're like, you fought a fish for 25 minutes. It's ridiculous. So it makes a big difference in the gear today. So again, so this reel right here, we've got almost 600 yards on that. So, it's not that when you change what gear you're using, you can also gain the line capacity. So it makes a difference.
We run 600 yards of braid and 100 yards of 130 moi moi mono.
No, that one has
That's
now
80.
have 80.
That one's 80, and then we actually do have some larger ones. We'll get to 130 on. But guys, with that rod right there, just kind of getting back to the whole sharking thing for guys that go sharking.
For those of you who haven't,
cool
just
thing
pass
about
it around.
that is, we just basically
just pass
stick
it
it in the
around.
rod holder, fish it like you're gonna fish a regular shark rig, and you lock the drag up. And now that you got to use circle hooks, the fish comes, rod loads up, it sets itself, and you're on. It's freaking sick. It's not like before you got to freaking hammer that hook home with the straight hook, trying to like wrestle like a 50. These things are so much more fun to fish with.
The other thing too is that using some of the jigs, you really got to work at it. And I'll tell you what, man, we do it every day, and still for us, after a while of doing it, you're all of a sudden you're like, these guys will tell you got to take a break for a minute. But the nice part about it is that with some of the Ron stuff, in the last few years, a dead stick Ronzi just sitting there, just with that light flutter, was all they were looking for. They weren't looking for you sitting there pounding your head in. They're just looking for it just with this light, sudden movement, and that's all it takes. So, we not as much last year as the year before. We had dead stick Ron sitting off the tip. We still do it every day. But like 2 years ago, that was like red hot. I could be sitting there pounding away at it, nothing. Dead stick Rons, boom, every single time. And the thing is that there's different price points, but it's again, this is another really.
So what the dead stick Rons is, for those of you guys that don't know, so we're gonna talk about some of the lures and ways we fish them. So essentially with this setup right here, or you can use a conventional reel. So you have a Ronzi lure.
Stupid question with these. How are you guys seeing after? I assume you've been running these a few seasons, at least in the salt. Like, how is the maintenance compared to like a conventional to the spinning reel?
So
are you seeing more maintenance on these, or they got their shit together pretty good?
It's tight.
Yeah.
Because so what we realize with those is the way that they're sealed up, that you have no penetration, and that has like an oil bath in it. So what ends up happening is that my conventional style stuff, isn't sitting there in a beautiful bath of oil, you know.
Yeah.
So it's dry. So what ends up happening is that by, every boat's different and how you have to put the stuff for the ride. Like, there are other shops that we deal with that also just all they do is take gear apart, and they'll tell you that they'll take apart a reel that a guy only uses 5-6 times a year. They pop the thing apart and it's just loaded with salt. So, and we saw it all the time. I mean, even with some of our conventional stuff, where all of a sudden some of the lever drags wouldn't still have the same throw, and we're like, dude, we're ridiculous about taking this stuff apart. To where that stuff, have we had issues? Yes. Why? Because we use it every day.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that is as reliable, if not more reliable, than a lot of our older conventional
I
stuff.
can show you afterwards how that's sealed. Some of the things that'll blow your mind.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
cool.
Over the top.
So dead stick Ron's, for those of you who don't know what that is, so I got a slide coming up that'll show you what the Ron's lure is. Basically, it's a lead head, and you have a long rubber body, so when the thing's in the water, it really looks like it's swimming. So what we do with these, whether you're fishing spinning gear, conventional gear, you drop it all the way down to the bottom, pretty much, and wherever you're marking fish, it might be 10 feet off the bottom or mid-water column, try and get your bait positioned there, stick it in the rod holder, and the rocking of the boat is going to jig that thing for you. And a lot of times we'll have guys jigging or we'll be fishing live baits, and that dead stick Ron's, the one that's just sitting in the rod holder, is the one that goes off. So we got a slide coming up on that. We'll get into that a little bit more, but that's what that is.
Roll with these too.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah.
You can stick them on Joe Shoots.
Yeah, I'll tell you what.
Thousands of dollars worth of shit. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking for something I can use for more.
Like-
So that's it.
application.
That is it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. So I absolutely love running, when we're trolling, some of our deeper swimming stuff with those. And it makes some people crazy that that's what I do. But the action in wherever that rod is, right? The action with that rod loaded up just right. I mean, I can end up putting a swimmer on it. And that thing's pulling down deep. And it's plenty stout to be able to handle it. So what's nice is that you can grab, 2 or 3 of those and have a decent, transitional something that you control with that. The only thing when you're trolling with it is that depending on what you have in the water, you have to really adjust that drag, because all of a sudden you need to troll something that's got weight in it, and you all of a sudden put it in there, and all of a sudden the thing's sitting there on a leash just straight out because it had too much drag to it to be able to compensate when the fish finally hit it. So you just got to be cognizant of what you're doing at what time. But they're
Yeah, Joe Shoots, you can, the Ronzis, the skirts, you can stick them on the Joe Shoots. So ballyhoo are expensive. And in the Northeast here, it's difficult to get nice green ballyhoo. The greenies are the fresh ones. If you guys get a bag of ballyhoo that's not vacuum sealed, you notice it's all bloody, the bait's no good. You want like the greenies. That's like the stuff that they shit out. That's the fresh ballyhoo. But ballyhoo's expensive. It's like $20 for like a bag of 5. So the keep saying Joe Shoot. The Ronzis, the skirts, work just as good on the Joe Shoots as the ballyhoo do. It has sick action.
Yeah.
They work great.
So Ralph said, thinking of you guys, let's take a break, go to the bathroom, and we'll jump right back into it when you're done.